It's now time for our first panel. So if I could please invite Sue Neales from The Australian, who is going to moderate this panel session, and the four panellists, so Olympia, Charles, Rachel and Susan, onto the stage. And we will kick off this session, which is out of the box. So we're meeting entrepreneurs who have embraced out-of-the-box thinking to grow vibrant regional businesses right around Australia. So please join me in welcoming the panel. Where's everyone else? Where's the other panellists? Oh, they're coming, that's right.
I'm alone.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you to all of you for having us here today. I think we're in for a terrific session. It's a great panel we've got here with us, and I think the talking about thinking outside the box, innovation, lateral thinking is obviously very relevant to where the industry is heading with our roadmap and $100 billion by 2030, carbon neutral, all those sorts of issues. It's been very reflective for me to be here today because I've been an agricultural journalist, for nearly 40 years now, and I started off as a young cadet journalist out of university with Stock and Land newspaper many years ago, and was actually there at the very beginning of National Farmers Federation when the states all got together and thought it was time to have a federal organisation. And I guess in those days I've sort of gone along through that time and seen the very different changes in agriculture. In those early days, it was very different. I remember I only wrote about sheep, stud cattle, wheat. We hardly ever mentioned the dairy industry. That was sort of something you didn't really talk about. And there was very little diversity in what was done in agriculture. With a career in between that's included foreign corresponding, war reporting, politics and all sorts of other journalism, I've been lucky enough to come back to agriculture for the last 8 years as the National Rural and Agribusiness Reporter with The Australian, which gives me a licence to tramp all over the country, whether it's Cape York, the Kimberley, Tasmania and everywhere in between, and meet a lot of people who are at the cutting edge of agriculture. And it's a great privilege, and a lot of people think I've got the best job in Australia. But it's also very different to come back to agriculture this time. I mean, what a change in farming ideas, people, production systems and products you see in agriculture these days. Just in the last few months, I've written about robots, the Internet of Things, a social licence to operate, animal ethics, tea tree oils, blockchain, camel milk, organic fruit, GM crops, lupins, kind wool, free trade agreements, methane emissions from cattle, the impact of climate change on agriculture, iPads and smartwatches in cattle yards. And then obviously the big issues of the need for capital, skills shortages, foreign land ownership, water, the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, climate change, drought, and the value adding of agriculture. I think they're all issues we're going to talk about today, looking both at what we have now and in the future and how our thinking will change, can change on some of those issues. The second change I've seen in my career is in the diversity of people in agriculture. One of my very earliest possessions in my career is a photograph taken by one of the photographers of Stock and Land of me sitting in a very hot hall on a February day, I think it was Oyun or Sea Lake, at a grain growers meeting. And I think we were talking about some radical cutting-edge new technology called minimum tillage, and it was 1981, I think. And the startling thing there is there am I sitting in the front row looking all eager while everyone else was probably asleep. I had my little notepad and pencil, and I'm the only female in the room. And it's a hall full of men. And I think you've only got to look around the room today and look at our panel, and obviously look at people like Fiona Simpson and many of the other women leaders in this room to see how wonderfully different agriculture is today, and I think we're probably the richer for it. Today we're going to talk about with our panel. Each of them will just talk briefly for a few minutes about why they're sitting here today, what they've done that's a bit different, and then we'll start to canvass some of the big issues. I'll go and sit over there now with the panel, and I'll let them take it from there. You've all got your biographies of our panel here. We have Olympia, Charles, Rachel and Susan in that order. And I'll start off with Rachel. She's probably one of the ones I'll start off with Olympia. She's probably the one who's doing the most different farming, and if she could tell us a little bit about what you do with Goterra and how you became an insect farmer and that would be great to start there.
Sure. So my name's Olympia Yarger. I farm insects on food waste in modular robotic units. I came from conventional agriculture. I worked on the Monero and Southern Tablelands, New South Wales Department of Ag, and I was going to be a sheep farmer for the rest of my life. So the irony that I'm now a maggot farmer should not be lost on anybody. I couldn't get back to conventional agriculture after about 14 years away because of the challenges for somebody who can't inherit a farm to actually get onto a conventional farming property. So I looked for alternatives and Google led me to insect farming. We now farm food waste out of our facility in Canberra. We have a footprint in Brisbane and we'll be establishing another one in Melbourne at the beginning of next year. We farm 2 types of insects, one for livestock feed production, the black soldier fly, and one for human consumption, the mealworm. We farm 2 different types of waste stream. The black soldier fly eat putrescibles and effluent, and the mealworm eat predominantly grape mark. And I'm really excited to say that next year we will process over 200 tonne of grape mark through our Canberra facility from wineries within a 2-hour radius of Canberra. So we're sustainable, we're circular, but we do believe we fit at the intersection of where agriculture and industry meets the citizens of urban locations, and our operation is completely decentralised, which is a new way of handling food waste. So we do not want to truck waste further than 20 kilometres to any of our processing systems. So that's us.
So what does your farm actually look like, Olympia?
It's a shed full of blue shipping containers. It's really fancy.
And are the insects on the floor or in cages?
No, we don't do free-range insects. There are often times when we have maggot emergencies and they might get there, but insects are predominantly farmed in small, shallow trays, and they are stacked and racked. Our system allows 300 kilos of protein to be farmed in a cubic metre.
So you're a classic example of one man's waste is another man's or woman's treasure, is that
Exactly. Yeah, I've never cared so much about apple cores coming out of an office building in my life.
So obviously alternative protein is what you're about. So some of your insect products go to human consumption and some to animal feed?
Correct. So the black soldier fly is a livestock feed commodity, and the mealworm can be either, but for us it will be a human consumption product, and we will look to make FMCG commodities from that product.
So you don't make muesli bars and ice cream yourself?
No, we are B2B, so we sell to business owners who are interested in using insects for human consumption.
And that is a big growing area, the alternative protein industry?
Yeah, so both food and feed will exceed 1 billion by 2022.
Thank you very much. Now, Charles, perhaps you could tell us. Now, Charles, you all know from your biography, is a wool grower from near Armidale, New South Wales, but he's also here in another capacity today as someone who passionately believes in the need to help Australian farmers and farming to become more businesslike and perhaps more able to be open to the input of external capital. And he'll tell you a little bit more about his AgEdge business today.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. So Charles Coventry, I'm a wool grower on the eastern side of Armidale, sort of 6th generation, but spent most of my career trading grain, based out of Sydney and other parts of country and overseas. But one of the key aids to the family business today, the farm business today, has been a small business that I've been involved with called AgEdge. AgEdge is a board of directors for farmers. So it's really a sounding board for ideas where farmers come together in a professional environment, meeting 4 times a year to discuss their challenges and problems. I believe I've got a slide I might just bring up briefly, if you don't mind. So to I suppose illustrate what is not a particularly animated setting, but is a boardroom, is in this case we have 6 family farm businesses. Not just sheep cattle cropping, we have seed businesses, we have a range of different businesses that are across regional New South Wales. It's been running for 25 years, and it's really only ever been word of mouth. And so I suppose while I take no credit for starting the model, currently as my term as president, I think it needs to be more widely known about, because it's been such a helpful product for me in helping us to develop our own farm business. So it allows you to get ideas and solutions for challenges. It allows you to focus on goal setting. So certainly for my wife and I, the goal setting's been a very important tool to allow us to achieve what we want to achieve in a tighter time frame. But it also helps universally with your farm challenges. So an agronomist, by way of example, is a very important skill set, but is very specific to one problem. Commonly, the problems that may be blocking a business could be ranging from succession planning to depression, a whole range of challenges, even into family communication. So we solve whatever the blockage may be to allow the business to progress and grow quickly. And part of achieving that is benchmarking the business so that we can compare against other small businesses. So by way of example of the feedback from members is a sounding board for ideas, a way to make your decisions more accountable. It's been, for a lot of people, peace of mind around making their strategic decisions, and the ability to discuss personal and business problems with people that they trust.
So Charles, just interrupting here, so the impetus for this was that a lot of farmers are obviously quite isolated. They are in their own tractors or on their own farms and often don't have enough outside input for thinking in a more business-like way, or is that the sort of thinking behind it?
Yeah, look, it came together because a group of farmers realised that in what can more traditionally be an environment that doesn't communicate as openly, they were willing to communicate and share their own challenges, and through that it formed these board structures that allow farmers to come off farm and communicate openly in a professional environment where they can trust their fellow board members to help solve their challenges for them.
And presumably it also removes some of the personal tensions that you often get within extended family businesses.
Oh, entirely true. I mean, my wife will willingly use the opportunity to straighten me out from maybe a lack of communication in front of my board. And we've got to solve those things because they can sometimes be the key blockages to the business.
And I think everyone knows the terrible stories of farm succession planning and the dreaded daughter-in-law involvement and all those stories, which are really sad ones often in the agricultural scene. Now, to Charles's left, we've got Rachel Hinkley, who was Victoria Australian Farmer of the Year. She farms down in Western Victoria. And Rachel's going to tell us a little bit about how she finds farming these days and what her family have done to think a little bit outside the square.
Thanks, Sue. In 2004, my husband Matthew and I left industry. We both worked in agriculture for a number of years when we decided that we thought that we could give it a go on our own bat. And so we were both Victorian. We met at university, actually. We both studied agricultural science. Matthew's from Mortlake, so we returned to that area of southwest Victoria and identified it as a region where we really thought that we could make a good go of grain cropping. It's an area that experiences very reliable rainfall, which comes with its own problems. But at the time in 2004, we saw it as a very undervalued region of Australia for growing grain, and we thought that the land values were perhaps undervalued as well. At the time, the area was mostly used for, mixed farming, but mostly livestock production, and so 2004 coincided with lower commodity prices for livestock, so therefore land prices were about on par. So we bought into the area and we decided to go alone for some of the reasons that have been touched on. We didn't want to be beholden to family. We wanted to make all of our decisions ourselves. We had some very strong opinions on how to do things and how we wanted it to be done. Matthew's a very stubborn sort of a person, and I can be too. And so it was easier if just the two of us only ever had to agree on any forward direction without having to put it through a family structure. So we bought our own property and we started from there. Because we had to start alone, access to capital was and continues to be a big issue for our business, but as time goes by, we're getting much better at accessing capital. It's, you know, with our bank, for example, we have Ron's on the board now, and they really trust us, which is lovely. So how we went about starting on our own and expanding quite rapidly in the last 15 years, and we're certainly not finished expanding yet, is to have a very structured business plan. We don't have a board, well, we have a board of directors of 2, and we often meet at 8:15 when the kids are on the bus. But we have always been very forthright in running our business as a business, because we call ourselves, we're not generational farmers. Matthew is, but it's our own business. We run it purely as a business. We don't put emotion into anything. We buy and sell properties quite happily. There's no emotional attachment to previous generations, and I think that gives us a real freedom and a flexibility to make decisions. So that certainly helps. The other thing that we have never done is we've never accepted the status quo. We've always pushed the boundaries in farming in our region of Victoria, and if I've got a second, I'll just explain briefly why our area is unique. As I said, it's the high rainfall zone of southwest Victoria, and we reliably receive between 500 and 700 millimetres of rain each year. About 400 to 500 millimetres of that occurs in the growing season, which seems like a lovely problem to have for areas that are in drought, and my sympathies go out to you, but it means that we actually deal with severe waterlogging issues through May, sometimes May, as early as May, but June, July, August, and that means that we really suffer from waterlogging. So we have a system of raised bed farming, which I can touch on a bit later if you like, but it means that we pretty much do irrigation in reverse. We capture all of our water from rainfall, and the idea for us is to get that water off our paddocks as quickly as possible and into drains, and then ultimately into catchment areas or to the natural watercourse. And raised bed cropping in its peak covered about 60,000 hectares of Victoria, and unfortunately that's now down to about 20,000 hectares. During the Millennium Drought, a lot of raised bed farmers in our area pulled the beds out because they couldn't see the benefit of them in that dry period. Raised beds are very labour intensive, and they are very expensive to run in terms of land preparation. It's difficult to run stocks, it's difficult to muster. If you had a fire through there, that's another issue because you've got to run with the beds.
Now, Rachel, just obviously being waterlogged is a very pleasant problem for you to have compared to a lot of people at the moment. What other things have you done that are different to other farmers in your area and perhaps more traditional practices?
Yeah, so as I said, we don't accept the status quo. So we didn't have a bed former to make the raised beds that suited, or we didn't think it was up to scratch. So we engineered our own. We designed our own, engineered our own. There wasn't an air seeder that really accommodated our farming system properly, or as well as we wanted it to be. So we, after much toing and froing with a couple of manufacturers, we were able to use the bar from one company and the tines from another and put them together. But we had a lot of opposition from them for that because they didn't want us to essentially bastardise each product and then have a recourse on them. But it's worked really well, and now that exact model is being used by a number of growers who also have raised beds. Because trafficability is very difficult in wet soils, we have modified our boom spray to go onto tracks. So that was a bit of a headache in itself, but, you know, it's turning dividends.
So,
the other thing...
Rachel, we might actually go into some of the technology issues later. Perhaps we can now hear from Susan, who is a citrus farmer, and she'll tell you more about her operations. She is very exposed, or managed her risk very well by having operations both in Queensland and in Laos, and is obviously very interested therefore in some of the discussions going on at the moment around global politics, world trade, and is right at the forefront of where many farmers will probably be in the future.
All right, we're mandarin growers, so we're part of the wonderful mandarin story that we heard earlier, in that it's actually quite booming. Export for mandarins at the moment is excellent because it's being pushed by very strong demand and prices in China at the moment. And I very much heard the cautionary tale there this morning, and I absolutely agree with that. We're citrus farmers, very much like Rachel. We started from scratch. My husband's from a sheep and cattle property down in Mount Gambier, and I'm a city girl from Wollongong. So we actually met here at ANU in Canberra, so it's a heart moment here. We actually set our farm up with export in mind, which was pretty contrary to the... we're in a mandarin citrus growing area, but we actually set the orchard up with export in mind and with one particular market, Indonesia, in mind at the time. So when we planted, we were doing something quite different in our area. We could see that Australian domestic market is not huge. There's an awful lot of citrus being grown in Australia, and I suppose we were looking ahead and saying, well, this market's going to be full. So out of that, we basically did everything from scratch. We're a bit like Rachel. Capital at the start was enormously difficult. We weren't proven. We just had one bank manager who gave us a go at the start and bought our loyalty for the next 30 years and has made a lot of good money out of us, probably. So we also, we've tried to be at the forefront of new technologies or new ways of doing things. You know, we've looked very, very much into doing very efficient irrigation and trying to take on the new technologies as they come on stream. I suppose we're always looking out for new and different things to have a go.
And when did you decide to actually invest in farming in Laos? And was that because of counter-cyclical meeting?
Well, actually, there's a bit of a story out of that because it came out of our involvement with seasonal worker program, which might be a contentious thing we'd talk about later. But we were having the workers coming over from these Pacific countries, and I'm thinking, they come here, they learn all these skills on our farms about growing citrus. Wouldn't it be nice to go back home and to have a project in country that they could go back home to and actually utilise those skills? Well, it didn't go that way. That was just a dream. So in the end, an opportunity came up in Laos to set up a citrus business over there, helping subsistence farmers to basically move out of subsistence into commercial agriculture, where we're providing the trees, the skills, the knowledge, so that they can actually grow citrus on their own farms.
And it also enables you to keep a supply of mandarins to your markets all year round.
Absolutely. Therefore? And when we talk to the farmers and I say, look, well, I'm just another Westerner turn up in your small community promising you the world. You've seen it all before, you've heard it all before. I say, why do you guys trust me? Why did you even come on board? And they actually said it was the marketing is something that they can't do. Like some of these guys don't even get into Villabulli, which is bigger than Mandubra where I come from, but it's still quite a remote area. So the fact that I could offer them ready markets in the ASEAN region, because pretty much a lot of our trade, nearly all our trade is in the ASEAN region and China, Taiwan, that area, yeah.
Well, thank you all very much. Now, obviously today we've heard about the farm plan, the $100 billion industry by 2030, the roadmap's been talked about. I'd be interested in all your views on, can we do this, and what are the potential barriers to it happening? Is it capital, is it labour, is it attitudes, is it politics, and how you each see that issue of growing an industry, not just the value of it, but the actual production of it?
I think for me the greatest challenge, I think we can totally do it. I think that's not a question. I think the biggest challenge will be climate change, and conventional farming still requires predictable climate, and we can do all the precision data we like. We can't make it rain. So I think that and turning into that knowledge is what's going to be key in creating success. The rest, I think we're already there. We were already looking for innovative ways. We're already on the forefront there, and the labour and the investment, I think, is all starting to turn up. So I'm not as worried about those things as I am about accepting the reality of climate change and understanding what it'll mean moving forward.
Will it be need new versatility of thinking, in that people need to have the idea of new industries like yours, new forms of agriculture?
I think it gets even deeper than that. So everybody says, oh, the maggot farmer's on the panel because that's innovative, like farming maggots. And yes, but no. Farming insects is not new. Anyone in Thailand would laugh at that suggestion. But what is new is this idea of decentralising farming of insects, and we didn't decentralise because the numbers around waste are not real. There are 3 million tonnes of food waste in Australia every year, and that doesn't include hort waste, but anyone who feeds hogs, cattle or sheep during a drought knows where most of that clean organics goes, and it's not to an insect farm. So it gets deeper than innovation and more around the dynamic of understanding what our supply chains are going to look like and what that actually means for farming. So conventional insect farming is clean organics into a large factory system, in clean insect protein out, and I already know I can't get those clean organics, and I'm not trucking food waste from Wagga to Canberra. So it's where putrescibles into insect protein, yes, I'll be 10% less protein, but I've solved a problem and I've created a lot. So it's that changing of, the innovation can't just be that first step of a drone in the sky or spectral data of what else, where else, and how does that actually fit into supply chains given the push and pull of everything else. That's going to be the difference, I think.
And Rachel, on your farm, could you suddenly double production by 2030? What would be the barriers to it?
Yeah, so for us, varietal improvements will be a big uplift. We're certainly getting better at managing fungicide, like our fungicide strategy, because in a wet environment, that is a big issue for us. But varietal improvements, certainly we're starting to use. It comes a lot to around agronomy for us, actually. The uplift will probably come from agronomy and around the use of growth regulators now to improve yield. So again, it all comes around to, but the central thing for us is we've got to be able to manage water, and then everything else can come from there.
Because we all hear about how grain yields have essentially plateaued since the turn of the last century and since the Green Revolution in the 70s. Are you...
No, we're not finding that at all. We are actually finding increases each year. So with our improved seeding, with our improved trafficability, which is raised bed certainly helps in that form. No, we are seeing a lift year on year, and certainly. Well, I keep coming back to varieties. I mean, that's going to help us. We go down to Tasmania. We went down last year, and we're going to go again this year to the hyper-yielding field days down at Hinkley in Tasmania, because they've got some really good ideas about how to just get that extra out of every crop that you grow. So that's certainly where we're looking now.
And Charles, $100 billion, can we do it, and how should we do it? What will be the key ways of doing it?
Yeah, look, it's definitely achievable. Probably one key area is to continue to invest in our education so we can develop the skill base within agriculture, continue to lift the bar of the skilled workforce, because the workforce can be somewhat ageing, can be maybe conservative. We've got to continue to get that to be young, diverse, a mixture. In my farm I have a mixture of male, female, we have all sorts of diversity just within a small farm as much as possible, because that creates the wealth of ideas. And I mean, some of those ideas for us was to be the first to do DNA testing across 5 sire groups within a 12-month cycle, to be able to buy a ram and then reselect from that stud based on the genetic feedback. So I think it's around skills development education, because that brings us to the point of innovation happening from the ground up. Because as we innovate, we can continue to be productive, achieve high productivity gains, which allows us to be competitive. We've got to be competitive.
You've just mentioned, obviously, the skills issue, which we've talked about and been touched on quite a lot this morning already. For you, Susan, obviously you're in the horticultural industry. What are the answers? Is it no backpacker tax? Is it no backpackers? Is it getting people on the dole out to work in regional Australia? Or is it the seasonal migrant program? Or is it a special agricultural visa? What's your views on this area?
Well, obviously in horticulture, labour is absolutely critical at the moment until the technology gets there, and it's not there yet in terms of... and with the cost of labour in Australia, you find that labour is probably 40 to 50% of the running costs of our business, which is vastly different to the running costs of the people who are our main competitors on the world market. So we have to get very smart in what we're doing, and part of trying to do that was, I have to stand up and say I'm a devout supporter of the seasonal worker program. In the early days, I worked very, very hard to see that this program didn't slip off the radar completely, because I was very afraid it would, because the take-up was so low for a lot of reasons. I think I think it's an important program because it's a win-win-win-win thing, you know. It's good for our local community, it's good for the community where the guys come from and the women come from, it's good for foreign relations, it's good for cultural mixing. Of course, it's not perfect by a long shot. It's very frustrating, and I understand why a lot of people are sidelining it and looking for an agriculture visa. My personal opinion is let's just get seasonal worker program working really well, because I think it can fill that gap. There is hundreds of thousands of people in the 8 or 9 Pacific nations ready and waiting to come here.
But is it a lack of workers a real problem in rural Australia today and regional Australia? Because we hear at the moment the political dialogue is all about moving more people to the regions, people on the dole to the regions. I mean, is this a problem and is that the solution?
There's an absolute lack in our area. We employ local people first. We employ Australians first. You can't just pull people off the dole and expect them to go and pick fruit in regional Australia. They have no connections there, they don't have the fitness, they don't have the mental toughness, they don't have the physical toughness. They're isolated in an area they're not familiar with living in. You know, they're city people. It's really an unrealistic solution, in my opinion. We advertise as under the rules of seasonal labour. It drives me stark raving mad because it's such a waste of time, but we advertise every single time we recruit, 3 times a year for the last 10 years. I would say we've got about under a dozen people who have stayed for the season. We employ everyone who fills the application form out, basically Australians. We say you've got the job. When it comes to the start date, they're not there, they do a day, because they don't have the actual skills. It's a skilled job. I think people sometimes think farming's not skilled, and it's a highly skilled profession. It's skilled for pickers, it's skilled for everybody involved in it. And I think sometimes it's all part of that, people just saying, just send these problems out to the farms, they'll fix them. It's an unreal solution.
Another barrier to agriculture expanding is often talked about is the lack of capital. And we all know the push to make farms investment ready, and a lot of people looking to whether they take in private equity, they sell to foreigners, they sell the business. And obviously we have a lot of pension funds interested in investing in Australia at the moment. Several of you have mentioned the lack of capital when you all started out. Do you think that is potentially the circuit breaker, that if we can make farms more investment ready and get capital and equity into those farms, it will sort of solve the problem and make everybody more productive? Or what's the panel's thinking on that? Charles, do you want to go first?
Yeah, look, in our farm we've done a joint venture, which is what we did 4 years ago. Is my father retired, and effectively his half of the business we sold to an Italian family, Zegna. So that has allowed us to grow our farm business significantly, because we've been able to, through a drought, we've continued to invest in infrastructure. So we've now gone from 90 paddocks to 165 paddocks. We've expanded our improved pasture, we've expanded our fertiliser program, we've built yards, we've built infrastructure to create efficiency that can reduce the amount of time it takes us to complete tasks. So that's a real-time example of offshore investment directly into our farm business. It allowed me for my father to retire, for me to pay him. It allowed me to buy other country for the part that I sold. And it's been a fantastic influence within the Australian wool industry to allow us to take the wool from our farm all the way through to suits. So this is a Zegna suit that comes from the wool coming from our farm directly to a retail brand that is obviously a very well-known Italian brand. And so we fully endorse and support the off-farm investment. It's very important to help create opportunities, and it's been great for us to have restructured our business that way.
Was it difficult to make your farm ready for a co-investor, and has it actually also changed the way you operate your farm in terms of the business processes around that and the need to keep your partner informed and involved?
Yeah. certainly a huge step up in the amount of communication. Obviously, my father and I communicating was only a minor amount of communication. The amount of communication I provide now is significant. You know, board papers, monthly report, but with good communication, you create a really good relationship and a good, strong trust. So yes, there's a lift in the bar in the amount of communication, but you get the benefits from that because you then create, with the benefit of diversity, a business culture on the other side of the world that is an impeccable business culture that can have an influence and assistance to us in challenging our day-to-day thinking and really getting us to step up, raise the bar in what we do and how we think about it.
Olympia, your area is obviously a growing area. Do you look to expand your business, and then how do you go about that in the search for capital?
So we are sort of more in the ag tech space and the conventional ag. So I started Goterra in my garage in a bunch of stuff stuck together with masking tape. And then the ACT government thought that was really cool and gave me a grant. And so I moved into a shed and took the duct tape stuff with me. The challenge, I think, for ag tech, and particularly for us, we were both a tech solution, but we had to have maggots to put in the tech solution. So we weren't one or the other, and the challenge for us to get investment ready was to explain the business case of those two things together, and we were trying to sell something that was alive. So, you know, if you're building a software stack and you need more widgets, you just make more widgets. If the maggots die, I'm 5 weeks before I can get back on my feet again. It doesn't matter how cool my tech is. And so the challenge of, I think the biggest challenge for me was, as an only founder, it was just myself, 2 ton of maggots in the shed for a year and a half, trying to both farm, build tech, and be ready for investors. And contextually, Australians don't have a great working relationship with the Silicon Valley type venture capital experience. And so it took quite a while and some really phenomenal mentors for me to get to the place where we were ready for financial capital. And so ag tech as a whole for Australia is really strong and got a really vibrant community and lots of really innovative people in the space, but we're still trying to build tech for an industry that is right on the margin, and so the risk is higher for them to try these trials and new prototypes.
So do you have outside equity and outside investors in your business?
It's not official yet, but yes, we closed our seed funding round with venture capital investment 3 months ago.
And what sort of scale was that?
It was a $1.2 million round. So, and the interesting part, and I think potentially what is exciting about our round, was that it is from tech investment. I think that speaks a lot about who's watching agriculture right now, who's interested in creating farming systems, not just that are software-based, but also around farming and what can be used. And so I think that's a great move forward.
And Rachel and Susan, the narrative at the moment is often around the need for farmers to get bigger and to take on investment and grow. Is getting bigger the way you see it would suit your ventures? Is that where you're heading, or is that the only solution?
Well, for us, we'd still like to continue to grow up to a certain size, but then this is something we often discuss. There's got to be a sweet spot in size versus then when you start to lose out on, attention to detail is something that we go on about on our farm all the time. And if we can stay at a size that's big enough to continue to be profitable and provide a good economy of scale, but us not to lose that absolute oversight on everything that we do, I think that's right, but it's finding exactly that point, I think, that will be difficult, because we find as you get bigger, as everyone would know, a little few, 1%ers start to drop off, and that's what we're trying to maintain, that the greatest size that we can, but the greatest attention to detail we can in our current structure. And we do have 2 employees at the moment, and how much bigger we want to get in terms of employers, I don't know, for all the problems that come with employees and managing other people. So I think that's a really valid point, and that is something that we wrestle with and we discuss regularly.
And Susan, you're still a family business. Are you looking for outside investment?
Not really at the moment. There's sort of 2 answers to this question. One, for us to expand, we have an issue in our areas of actually getting good middle management who want to come to a small country town of 2,000 people that doesn't have a high score to year 12, and it's quite difficult to get that management people to actually come to our district. So that does limit how big you can get, because obviously you need middle management. You can breed them, which is what we've tried to do. So we've got one son-in-law came in, ran the packing shed, and then decided banking was better, and so we lost him. And we've got another son-in-law in as a farm manager. I've got 2 more daughters and a son yet, so we've got a few people we can still sort of try and drag back in. I think the other thing is looking at our industry as a whole, and maybe mindful of some of the things that I've heard already this morning, is that there's going to be a lot of new industries, like Olivia's industries, coming in. You've got to have the funding, the banking, or the funding out there to give people a go. As I mentioned, we got our start by a bank manager just going, we weren't proven. He gave us a go. And I'm just not sure that climate would be still here for a young couple coming in, wanting to do something different in agriculture. There's climate change around the corner. We need new industries coming in. You've got to have someone in there behind backing these sort of people to come into the industry. And as Charles mentioned, I'm not young. You don't need me to be expanding. We need young people to be coming in and starting up new businesses and doing young and awesome and different things.
After having sat through the Banking Royal Commission on farms in the last few months, I think there's probably a very changed attitude to investing in farming, and I think that some of the repercussions potentially are that capital will be less available rather than more so, particularly with newcomers. So
well, it's a little bit the flavour of the moment, horticulture, which is quite interesting for us, having been in horticulture for quite some time, and horticulture did not really even come on the radar in a lot of ways, in policies and all sorts of things. So.
One of the great opportunities for agriculture in the next few years is obviously there is now this renewed consumer interest in food and where our food comes from, and agriculture's become a little bit sexy, as somebody said earlier today. I guess hand in hand goes with that is a greater exposure to the way we farm and what we do on our farms, and this whole issue of the city-country gap and a lack of understanding about agriculture and farming. How do you as a panel see those issues about the right to farm, social licence to operate? We get right down to the glyphosate debate, the animal welfare debate, and obviously we've seen the gaps being exposed in the live export issue recently, and potentially the glyphosate one as well. Is that an opportunity for farming or in agriculture, or is it a potential threat or risk to agriculture? Do you need to change the way you do businesses, or are you happy to have glass walls on all your sheds, as someone mentioned in a debate we were having yesterday about ethics?
Well, I'd really like to, I'd like agriculture to perhaps advertise ourselves better to wider Australia so that they can see that we are doing a really good job, that we are wardens or guardians of our land, that we have millions of dollars tied up in land assets, and it's not in our best interest to degrade those assets in our farming practices. We proudly tell people that we are conventional farmers with an eye to best management practices, so we don't put out pesticides, at a whim, because it's expensive to do so. So it's not in our interest to use them foolishly or, when they're not required. So I'd really like agriculture to tell a better story to the consumers, to put across our story that we are doing a really good job, that we are clean, that we are green. We don't have to be organic to, to meet those targets for health and wellbeing in food production.
Olympia, I think you had a view on this.
Yeah, I agree. I think certainly we're not keeping up with the churn. Churn, particularly in social media, is a hourly, minute-by-minute thing, and agriculture is losing. And I think we ignore the fact that, for me, I think that social licence is either a good thing or a bad thing, and I see it as a good thing. So the people complaining about transparency or lack of, or having uninformed opinions about intensive farming and use of pesticides, etc., I think is an opportunity, and I think we're not using it properly, because there are no other industries in the world whose consumers care so much about what is being produced that they would shut an industry down based on an inaccurate perception. So for me, for anyone who's saying, oh, well, you probably don't have that problem, the European Union has just released its first white paper on the ethical farming of insects. It is already coming. I get asked at least once a week if my maggots are happy. And how do I know that they are? And I tell them quite happily, if they're not happy, they're dead. But that's a reality. And so I can either scoff, because between you, me and the fence post, I don't overwhelmingly believe that I should care particularly about the feelings of my maggots. But I am more than happy to turn the lights on, as my friend Cam Scatting would say, and make sure that people understand that I care about their opinion about whether or not my maggots are happy. And that's all that matters. And what is it really to my business to have that added narrative in what we do? It's not an effort for us. It means that when and if that issue becomes raised, they will go looking angrily for fodder, and they will come to our website and they will find words like devitalising and harmonious. And those things just create an impression that we care about the morality of farming animals intensively. So for me, it's about reshaping our conversations so we're speaking to the concerns that people have, and that's quite easy to do and creates transparency without putting glass walls up.
Charles, you're a wool grower, and obviously the issue of mulesing is centre and fronter at the moment, with New Zealand having banned it from 1st of October. What's your perception about animal ethics and the impact of it on your own business?
Yeah, sure. Well, we have to listen to our consumer. We have to move more quickly. We are sometimes a little bit slow to grab these opportunities. Our social licence is so important. It's a challenge, but if we tell our story, and I don't think it's a completely open door policy, because it's not for other people maybe to judge, take their own interpretation, but it's for us to control the message and to tell our story about the wonderful things we do as farmers, and how much we care and give attention to detail in doing what we do well. And the more we can look, Sue, for supply chain opportunities that allow us to carry the message directly through the supply chain. So I suppose in our business, the wool going directly to Xenia and into Xenia shops means that all of the salespeople have correct messaging and can talk directly to consumers to allow the Australian wool industry to be amplified through products directly with consumers. So that's a way that we can tell the story and tell it correctly.
Obviously, drought's been a big issue lately, and climate change is obviously at the back of that. How do you all see the climate change challenge affecting you in the next few years, and also, I suppose, the outside perception of climate change in agriculture impacting from outside onto your farming businesses?
So it's already affected us. Again, the story of waste is that there's 3 million tonnes of it, and I should have no problem finding it. Mealworms eat dry agricultural products, so there is no bran available in New South Wales at this time for us to purchase. We imported some from Queensland, but it'll probably be the last small batch run that we'll be able to buy. So for us, production of mealworms, we have to find another substrate for our neonates. Water-wise, we're kind of fine. We run around 400 millilitres per kilo of protein farms, so we don't require a lot of water, but we already see a lot of the supply of large volume wastes disappearing as farmers continue to walk down the food waste chain looking for reliable waste streams. And I think that's really important to think about, because insect farming is supposed to solve a problem of waste, and it sort of comes back to that conversation around understanding supply chains, because if I'm walking around in the world assuming that I can run my money on the 3 million tonnes and there's really only 1 million and they're kind of in small kilo lots, then what am I doing? So for us, it's been pretty pivotal in making sure that we have a philosophy around our vision that it fits into that supply chain, which is we only farm waste streams that cannot be used by farmers or aren't used within the first 5 years of drought. And it's been pivotal to how we manage things.
And Susan, can your farm be carbon neutral by 2030, part of the debate we're having at the moment? Do you know your carbon footprint?
No. I suppose in terms of it's really, we do have a carbon footprint. We're always looking for ways to reduce that, I suppose. I don't know if I couldn't tell you, quantify it. You put your name up for coming in and looking at alternative. We use electricity to pump water, we're using water, we're using tractors, so there's no doubt that we have a carbon footprint in what we do.
But are you hearing it from your buyers that they want to know about climate change and about how you use water and how you farm your systems? Is that becoming a way you sell your product?
I suppose it's a little bit different for us because we're actually exporting into Asia. So where people are actually buying our product because they think it's safe, which harks back to the discussion about perceptions of farming and that they think that you're just spraying chemicals all over everything. Every time I sit on a plane, I say I grow mandarins, somebody says, do you use chemicals? That's just an automatic response. But in fact, which is always a bit of I find it really weird, is that that concern that's expressed in Australia is the reason people are buying our fruit overseas, because we are perceived as being highly regulated in our use of these sort of products. So it's sometimes there's no logic in all of this, and that's sometimes you can get a little bit too concerned in trying to justify yourself, and I just harking back to the question about your social licence. We do things based on science, and I find it truly disturbing with all this social media churn now that science has gone out the window, and I don't know how to get it back on track, because we use products that have been highly, you don't get a chemical registered anywhere in the world without huge expense and huge research and all those sorts of things, despite the conspiracy theories that you hear out there. So that's a sort of, that really concerns me, how to be honest about what we do. I don't want to pretend I don't use chemicals, because I do. But at the same time, I don't want to, I don't want to be backed up into that corner where everything's leafy and green, and it's not a true picture of how we farm in Australia today. It's quite a scientific, business-like thing. Sorry, I got off the track completely with that.
I'm being told we've got time for one question from the floor. Is there anyone who'd like to have a question out there to the panel? No? Easy. I think it's over here. Well, I'd just like to say thank you very much to the panel. Oh, sorry, we have got one. Oh, down here, okay. One down there? Oh, you're closest, and one, okay, two.
Thank you. Ollie Laleeve and part of the Young Leaders Program. My question, I tweeted it, so I'm interested, what value do you place on your own knowledge as farmers, and what impact does it have every time a farmer leaves the gate as a financial burden for Australian ag?
Charles, do you want to start that one?
Yeah, look, it without a doubt is important, because as farmers we have such a diverse skill set across so many. It's a multiple number of disciplines. They're all little mini economies. You've got finger in many pies, but we can also place too much emphasis on existing skill sets, and in fact, in some respects, turnover, youth, fresh ideas allows us to rethink, re-engineer, re-innovate. So in some respects, it's actually good to have that turnover, to sell the family farm, to buy a different farm, because that refreshes everything, new innovation and ideas.
Also looking at other industries that aren't agriculture, because some of the really awesome ideas come out of completely different industries. So never just get in an agricultural huddle when you're looking for new ideas and new ways of doing things.
I think we've time for that one question down the back there. Have you got a microphone down there?
Peter Holding from Harden. I'm just wondering, I haven't heard a lot about where you see farming going, especially in the broadacre area that I'm a mixed farmer, so I'm involved in that, or maybe the sheep industry, with the effect of climate change if it continues to worsen. there doesn't seem to be a lot of understanding of the impact of temperature. What's your view on that?
I can throw this one at the panel. Rachel, how have you been looking at climate change and impacts of changing temperatures and water availability on your grain production?
Yeah, so we think it's going to be a real issue in our tiny little corner of the world where I said that we have quite reliable rainfall. We see actually increased pressure on that land becoming sought after as a reliable area. So we think there'll be pressure on land values for more people looking at those sorts of areas to come farming. The Wimmera Mallee has been having a terrible time in the last few years, and I think cropping will start, this is my personal opinion, will start to move further south because, year after year of low rainfall and no soil stored moisture, I think, is an end to nowhere. So I actually think it's a real problem. I don't know what we can do except become higher yielding areas in the high rainfall zones.
I mean, obviously there's a huge focus on breeding crops that are more resistant or tolerant of drought. I was recently in the World Wheat Breeding Centre in Mexico, and a lot of the focus of the research and breeding there, both from a genetic level but also a phenotypic level, is on breeding varieties that are better suited to drier conditions, and some of them are even looking at conditions that have changing levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as well. So, I mean, there's certainly that work is being done. Whether it happens in time, that's always the issue, but the variety trials are happening now, so there is certainly trying to bring on more disease resistance and more drought tolerance very quickly, that people know that the pressure is there. They can't take 10 years to bring a variety to fruition anymore. There's a lot more bringing seeds out earlier than they used to, just to see if they're working, because people know the pressure is being felt daily by farmers already. So I think some of it will be genetic and some of it might be adaptation, like moving cropping areas further south. And
also management practices too, in utilising growing season rainfall, fertiliser strategies, soil cultivation techniques. I think all that, so management plays a large part as well.
Charles, quickly.
Yeah, three comments. Very good question. We need to invest in weather forecasting, accepting climate change exists, because it's the biggest risk to our businesses. So longer term weather forecasting is still, we're looking forward to more solutions. Also within our businesses, we need to be changing our strategy. In our case, rotational grazing, planting trees, more ground cover so we can better manage the variation. But also to look towards seed breeding as part of the solution. And I think New Zealand does a fantastic job in their wheat breeding industry in terms of investing as farmers back into their varieties, and possibly as a culture we need to invest more in breeding.
Thank you all. Look, on behalf of this panel, I'd like to say thank you very much to everybody. It's great to be here talking about the future and thinking laterally and thinking outside the box. And I think we've had 4 fabulous speakers here today telling about their own experiences and their own perspectives. So I'd like to thank them all very much indeed.
And thank you, Sue, for moderating a fantastic panel. Some of the things that I pulled out of that panel session, it's rare when you get 4 really innovative, vibrant entrepreneurs who are putting into practice what they preach. Some of the things that I loved, Olympia got insects on food waste in robots, which I just couldn't wrap my head around. But something that interested me is that she knew she wasn't going to be able to farm the traditional way because of succession planning, and that's a whole nother conversation that I believe is a really important part of the conversation and the vibrancy of agriculture going forward. Charles brought into light the importance of having good corporate governance and communications, and if you're looking for investment, it's the first thing that foreign investors, national investors, super companies, that sort of thing are going to be looking for is what do your books look like, what are your meeting minutes, how are you actually professionally, what does the professional front of your business look like? I was also pretty impressed that he was wearing a suit that he grew because of the Italian sort of involvement in his business there. Rachel spoke about access to capital. What I really loved about Rachel's presentation is she's thought outside the box. So you've got waterlogging. I still want to grow grain. How can I do that differently? I'll lift the seed up out of the water and figure out how I can capture that water for times when I need it. It's technology like that that is really, really important. And some of the key things that Susan brought about, which actually was really interesting, is the cross-cultural involvement and the fact that she brings people in to help her on her business, but she's actually been able to give back to Laos as a country by helping them with skills setting up their farm, but that actually feeds into her value chain, so she's able to provide fruit all year round. And I think that that was wonderful. Something that did stick with me was the fact that anyone who fills in a form that's an Australian gets a job at her place, and she's had less than a dozen that have actually stayed for the season. So I think there's massive conversations that need to happen in that space. So that was a wonderful panel.